Don't expect any more wedding presents from me because I just can't afford it. She said, oh, please don't, because this is it. I'm not going to get married anymore.
Before he was a Hollywood icon, Van Johnson was just a lonely boy, abandoned by his mother, dismissed by his father, and burning with a dream no one believed in. Van Johnson wasn't born with fame in his blood. He wasn't discovered in a soda shop or handed a role because of who he knew. No, his story began in Newport, Rhode Island in 1916, in a cold, broken home. His mother walked out when he was a child, gone without warning. His father, emotionally unavailable. Van grew up craving affection, but receiving silence. That emptiness, it didn't destroy him, it fueled him. As a teenager, Van became obsessed, not with school, not with sports, but with escape. Escape from his reality, from the sadness, from the invisibility. And that escape took the form of a single impossible goal: Hollywood. He moved to New York City with barely $1 and no connections. He waited tables, he scrubbed floors, he performed in cramped, smoky clubs for people who didn't even look up from their drinks. But every time he got on stage, even in the smallest role, something clicked. The shy kid disappeared, the performer was born. And soon, Broadway noticed. What Van didn't know was that this new spotlight would eventually save his career, but destroy his freedom. They called him the All-American Boy, but Hollywood knew the truth, and they would do anything to keep it quiet. When MGM signed Van Johnson in the early 1940s, they didn't just see talent, they saw a product, a wholesome, blue-eyed, freckled-faced symbol of everything good and pure about America. And then, fate handed them gold. While other male stars like Clark Gable and Jimmy Stewart were drafted into World War II, Van Johnson was disqualified after a horrific car crash nearly killed him, leaving a metal plate in his skull. He couldn't go to war, but he could play the hero on screen. And play it, he did. In A Guy Named Joe, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, and The Human Comedy, Van wasn't just acting. He was comfort food for a nation at war. He was the safe, reliable, ideal American man. Clean-cut, patriotic, straight. Or was he? Behind the scenes, executives at MGM were terrified. Whispers were growing louder, rumors about Van's personal life, that he wasn't like the other leading men, that he had different preferences. And in 1940s Hollywood, that wasn't just gossip, that was career suicide. Louis B. Mayer, MGM's ruthless studio boss, wasn't about to let his golden boy fall. So he did what studios did back then. He rewrote reality. He arranged a marriage. Van Johnson was paired with Eve Abbott, a beautiful actress and the freshly divorced wife of Johnson's close friend, Keenan Wynn. The marriage happened literally one day after her divorce was finalized. Why the rush? Because the rumors were too loud. And in Mayer's eyes, from the outside, Van Johnson and Eve Abbott looked like the picture of post-war romance. America swooned. The headlines wrote themselves. MGM could finally breathe easy. Their boy next door was now a husband, and soon a father. They had a daughter, Skylar, in 1948. Van even stepped in as a father figure to Eve's 2 sons from her previous marriage. On paper, they were the perfect blended family. But behind closed doors, something didn't add up. Decades later, Eve Abbott finally shattered the illusion. In an interview after Van's death, she dropped the bomb Hollywood had tried to bury for years. It wasn't a marriage. It was a business arrangement. MGM forced it on both of us. They needed their big star to be married, and I was the only woman he would agree to marry. Let that sink in. Van Johnson, the man every woman was told to adore, never wanted to marry a woman at all. Their life together, Eve revealed, was filled with emotional distance. Van was polite, even kind, but he was never truly present. And love? That wasn't part of the deal. At least, not between them. Eve's confession exposed the harsh truth. Van wasn't just hiding who he was from the world, he was hiding it from his own family. And the cracks in the facade? They were about to break wide open. Behind the camera, Van was slipping away from the story Hollywood wrote for him. By the 1950s, the studio system was weakening. The grip of men like Louis B. Mayer was fading, and Van, now past his peak fame, began taking risks that once would have been unthinkable. Then came London. While starring as Professor Harold Hill in The Music Man on the West End, Johnson allegedly fell into a passionate relationship, not with a co-star actress, but with a young male dancer in the cast. Eve's own son, Ned Wynn, confirmed it years later. He left her for a man, a boy, really, the lead dancer. And just like that, the lie unraveled. The marriage dissolved in silence. They separated in 1961. By 1968, it was over for good. But that wasn't the most shocking part. According to old Hollywood insiders, this wasn't a one-time affair. Stories began to surface, wild, whispered stories of secret parties in Beverly Hills mansions, of Van Johnson attending underground gatherings full of closeted actors, of romances hidden from the world. One rumor even claimed he slept with 8 different men in a single night, all actors, all under contract with the big studios. Was it true? Was it myth? No one knows for sure, but here's what is certain. Van Johnson was living a double life, under a system that demanded silence, punished honesty, and as the 1960s rolled on, the glamorous spotlight began to dim. Van Johnson was no longer MGM's golden boy. The boy next door charm was out of style, and the public had moved on to edgier, grittier stars. But what the world didn't see was the toll the years of secrecy had taken on him. Behind the scenes, Van had grown distant, withdrawn, almost unreachable. According to Eve Abbott, the man who lit up movie screens with warmth and charm was nothing like the man she lived with. He was moody, morose. He wouldn't argue. He'd just disappear, into his room, into himself. It wasn't anger. It wasn't cruelty. It was isolation. Van had spent his life performing, not just on screen, but in real life, pretending to be straight, pretending to be happy, pretending that the lie didn't hurt. And it did hurt. He reportedly cut off most of his emotional ties, including with his own daughter, Skylar. At the time of his death, they were estranged. He also carried deep wounds from childhood, particularly from his father, whose coldness had shaped Van into someone who never truly let people in. He was charming to the world, but utterly private at home. The truth? Van Johnson wasn't just running from public scandal. He was running from himself. While Van's public image stayed locked in a time capsule of 1940s innocence, there was another version of him, whispered about in hushed tones, a version the tabloids never dared touch. According to multiple Hollywood insiders, Van was a regular figure in an elite circle of closeted actors, men who lived double lives, just like him. They gathered in secret, they spoke in code, and when the studio lights went dark, they let go. Lavish private parties, hidden mansions in Laurel Canyon, secret entrances, paid-off drivers, no cameras, no press, just freedom. It was at one of these parties, so the story goes, that Van boasted to a close friend about a night where he slept with 8 different actors, all under major studios, MGM, Warner Brothers, Fox. Big names. Some of them even married. Whispers connected him to names like Roddy McDowall, Farley Granger, and even a young Rock Hudson. Were they lovers? Brief flings? Studio-mandated beard partners? We'll never fully know, but the whispers never stopped. And what's most shocking? These weren't tales of indulgence, they were tales of survival. In a time when being gay could end your career, your life, your safety, men like Van Johnson lived by coded rules, fake marriages, staged photographs, scripted interviews. Everything about their public identity was fiction. But the secret network beneath the surface, that was real. That was them. And for Van, it was likely the only place where he ever felt like he belonged. In the end, the man who once couldn't walk down a street without being mobbed disappeared without a sound. By the 1990s, Van Johnson quietly stepped away from the world he once ruled. No farewell tour, no big announcement, just silence. He moved into a modest penthouse in Manhattan, far from Hollywood, far from flashing lights. Neighbors said he kept to himself. No interviews, no scandals, no red carpets. Just a man, aging in peace, carrying a life's worth of secrets that he had never been allowed to speak aloud. Eventually, he relocated to a small assisted living facility in Nyack, New York, a quiet riverside town known more for art galleries than movie stars. It was a fitting place for someone who had spent his entire life performing to finally stop pretending. On December 12, 2008, Van Johnson died at age 92. There were no tabloid headlines, no studio tributes, no crowds of fans crying outside gates. Just a simple cremation and a legacy that, for decades, had been kept behind locked doors. They wanted you to remember the smile, the freckles, the clean-cut image, but here's what they didn't want you to know. Van Johnson wasn't just a movie star. He was a survivor of Hollywood's most brutal era, a time when truth could destroy you and lies were written into your contracts. He was used, rebranded, and sold to America as a fantasy, the perfect man with the perfect smile, living the perfect life. Except none of it was real. He loved in secret, he hurt in silence, he gave the world a version of himself he knew they wanted and buried the version they'd never accept. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Van Johnson didn't die in 2008. The real Van Johnson, the man who craved love, connection, and freedom, started dying the moment the cameras turned on. So when you see his movies, his posters, that picture-perfect face, don't just remember the star. Remember the man who had to hide to survive.